Hello chess fans, today I want to look over a mini match I had against famous chess creator Andras Toth. So while I was playing some Rapid, I had the chance to play him, and I got to play 3 games against him, so I want to look over the games today because it's not often that I get to play an esteemed chess creator, especially one that I have been watching for a while. So in the first game, my opponent started off with d4, and I know the style of Andras Toth is to go for a lot of theory and play very classically, so I decided to play as confusing as possible while playing this hyper modern sort of uh, Hikaru-like setup. And the games were 10-0, so I thought that I could still do this. So I went for this knight c6 variation, and this is like some sort of recent trend. You kind of have 2 ideas here. Either you can go back to a King's Indian, you can either go for bishop g4, or you can go for e5. And e5 is something Jeffrey Zhang likes a lot. After takes queen, the queen trade, it seems to be slightly bad for black, but actually these endgames are pretty practical, and apparently black scores really well there. But knight c6 is also playable. My opponent played the main line, which is d5. I played knight e5, and we got this exchange. So here it looks like black is just significantly worse because white has more of the center, and okay, it's going to be hard to break with either of these and try to get a pawn out of the center. So basically we've surrendered the center to white, but what we have in exchange for that is we have this really good bishop, and we probably are going to get a lead in development after e4. Knight f6, notice already black has a lead in development. Bishop d3. Now keep in mind, if your opponent has to defend the pawn here, because I was threatening takes. If they play a move like bishop e2, takes, and I would be up a pawn. It's not the end of the world, because after queen d4, knight f6, bishop h6, they get some compensation, but obviously this is less ideal than being down a pawn. Okay, so here I castle, my opponent castles, and I went for e6. And the idea is I want to open the e-file, and I also want the bishop. Sorry, I want to open the e-file so I can get the rook open. And so here my opponent played the move f4. And now f4 is a little bit of a strange move. It's not the best move exactly, because it does really weaken a lot of the dark squares around the king. And as you can see, I'm going to take immediate advantage of that. So here I play bishop d4 check. My opponent went king h1, and I took. And here I played the move knight g4. And the idea of knight g4 is to go for the move f5 and also threaten knight f2. So here, the way you can defend knight f2, obviously, because if knight f2, I'm going to win the exchange, is you can go for queen e1 to defend this. And after this, the line I had calculated is f5. I thought my opponent would play h3, knight f6, e takes f5, bishop takes f5, bishop takes f5, and g takes f5. And here I evaluated the position as probably around equal. Now the engine seems to disagree with me here, because I do have a lot of weaknesses around the king. I thought the g file would be pretty much null for both of us, and I thought the quality of our pieces is his bishop is absolutely horrible blocked by this pawn, while my bishop is standing nicely here. But apparently that doesn't matter, and the engine is giving the position as +1. So instead of that, my opponent played h3, which really confused me because that just blunders a full exchange. And so here I picked up the exchange, and my opponent tries to get counterplay. But just playing accurately here, my opponent played bishop e3, which is maybe a dubious move because it just gives up another pawn. Rook b1, bishop e7. Here I went for c6, b5, c5, threatening to pretty much lock up the bishop. Bishop c2 here, defended, and e5. And here I really am confused at my move because, okay, the whole idea of white basically in this position is they want to get a lot of activity, and the way they get activity is by locking up my pieces. So after I took here, my opponent played f5, which I completely missed. I only really thought that they would take here, and after takes, I'd just be completely winning. I thought the game was going to end soon here, but my opponent played f5, which is a very nice move. Instead of taking here, maybe I could have gone rook e8. Now I'm threatening to win this, and then have e4 after, a counter pawn sacrifice to pretty much prevent my opponent from playing f5. And at this point, if this would happen, this would be much better for me because now I have an active rook and a more active queen. So instead of that, I took, and my opponent went f5. I went bishop e7, threatening the pawn. Bishop e4, queen d6, rook f1. And yeah, here I don't know what happened. I kind of wanted to play rook here, threatening the pawn again. And after f6, I thought, okay, I can just sack and then pick up this pawn and we'll be completely winning. And this is what I calculated. But then I was like, okay, but what if this rook wants to go to the c file in that position? Like, this rook would be better there, right? Because then I can push the c pawn. So I played this rook, which is completely blundered that after takes, my opponent has queen f7 with this fork. And now my opponent is winning. And so such things happen when you're winning against the IM. You get nervous, you make some blunders. So here I played queen takes f8. And the best move is rook takes f8. And I kind of knew that was the best move, but I thought, yeah, here I kind of have to play for tricks. And I thought after rook takes f8, queen c6, it's just dead lost. There's pretty much no counterplay because, okay, if I move my queen back, I lose this pawn, and then this pawn's going to run. So I played queen x f8. And yeah, he can just start running the pawn pretty much immediately. Not immediately, but here he might have like a move like, yeah, d6. He can run the pawn immediately because after takes, he has takes here. But instead he pre-moved queen c6. So at this point I was like, okay, so then I got a better position because queen c6 is now less good. I've already moved my queen away. I played c4, saving my pawn. d6 here, I'm still lost. After rook d8, my opponent again misclicked and played bishop b6. So at this point I was really hopeful now I could win. Now, two things to note here. I was down a ton of time on the clock. I was down 3 minutes here. My opponent had 7 minutes. I had 4 minutes. So I just made a conceited effort to play as quickly as possible. So the next few moves, I pick up a few pawns. And now here, I played this pretty much ill-advised c3 move. I can just chill and do nothing, go like rook d6, defend my pawns, and slowly push them, and I'll win this game. But I rushed, and my opponent didn't take it because they wanted to simplify. Here, we both have a minute on the clock. And here I play some really accurate defense. I managed to trade off a bunch of pieces, and yeah, here I just have 3 pawns, and my opponent blunders a piece. And now we're in an opposite color bishop endgame, but 3 pawns is enough here. And now I blunder one, but I get my king in the game, and here I sack the piece because I saw the c2 tactic, and I get a queen into the game. So the first game I won. So I was obviously very ecstatic because I beat an IM, and I beat a player that I looked up to for a long time, and I still look up to them. Very great coach. And so I was happy because then he offered me a rematch and I got to play another game. So the more games you get to play against these higher rated players, the more you can learn. So I went for this pretty much hyper modern setup. My opponent went g6. Yeah, I was just saying it doesn't matter whether you play bishop c4 here or knight f3, kind of just transposes. So g6 here, I play bishop c4, bishop g7, takes, queen f3, attacking there. Knight h6, that's one of the moves. You can also play e6, and you can also play knight f6. That's also another move, and after the main line might look something like this. And here white is said to be a lot more better and more pleasant in practical games because of the fact that, okay, we just have to open files, we have better development, all your pieces are pretty much bad, and okay, h4, h5 is going to be a nasty attack. So my opponent played knight h6, I went for knight e2. Yep. My opponent castles, and here I played c3. So the main line is d3, and after something like knight g4, bishop b3, because you don't want to get forked, d6, and something like queen g3 preparing f4 and h4. White's supposed to be around the realm of plus 0.5 to plus 1 here. Now, I don't really like these types of positions. I've always pretty much thought that, okay, my bishops are, if they're not attacking, they're just going to be weak on the queen side. So I like this move c3 instead because after takes, knight g4, d4, it makes a lot more sense to me now because I have full control of the center. And after d6, okay, it's not like he has this nice thorn on d4. Instead, his bishop is eyeing this pawn, which is properly defended. And this is more like a Grunfeld type setup for white. But the problem with this is the c pawn is backwards, so this can only really be considered equal. Here I castled, queen c7, bishop b3, knight f6, rook e1. And important to mention that, okay, so move queen d3 here was played in the game Peter Lecko versus Zhang Zong versus Peter Lecko, and that was the only game we were following here, and this was 13 moves. So after rook e1, I played the engine's favorite move and an improvement on that game. b6, I didn't know it at that game at all. Here I was just playing by my own, and here I played e5, and what I was expecting is bishop b7, and after takes, I thought this position was very pleasant for me. The position is locked, meaning the 2 pieces are better than the 3 pieces are better than the queen. And yeah, generally I thought the position was nice for me. But then he took here, and I realized that if I take here, I'm getting my queen trapped. So here, what I should probably do is just take here, and after bishop b7, I can still go for this line. Now, the reason it's less good now, and the reason I didn't go for it, is because I was worried he would get, yeah, this quick central pawn expansion. And yeah, the more open the position is, the more dangerous the queen can be. The engine says this is equal, but honestly, I'm not too mad that I didn't go for this. I think in hindsight, I probably should have gone for it. But yeah, instead I took here because I thought that, okay, after this position, it might not be the worst in the world for me. I thought, okay, I have the 2 rooks instead of 3 pieces, but I think I'm a little bit more active here. And here I just played a really dumb move. Here, simply put, like, you should just do this to develop pieces. I'm not really sure why I didn't do this. Instead, I went here, which the bishop is just terrible here. And I lost in a few moves with this rook c1 move. Here, I should play rook d3, anticipating knight f4 and covering the d3 square. Played rook c1. I didn't think it made a difference. I was aligning with the queen. But here, played knight f4 with a double threat here and here. And okay, I blundered this. So that was the second game. I was a little bit disappointed. I didn't play my best game. But the third game, I decided that, okay, there's a lot of stuff I can play here. And I thought that my opponent probably played e4 because they want to play against the perk now. But I didn't really want to play a perk. So now I went for my e5 lines, and here I decided to play d6 because, again, I didn't want to get into any theory with this this guy because I knew he would be a theory buff. So here he castled. And again, I didn't want to go for the main line. So the main line here might look like bishop d7, c3, and g6. And this is definitely a very playable line, and honestly not even that bad of a line. But after d4, bishop g7, one of the lines that I generally don't like is after d5. And after the move knight c7, takes. I've always never liked this line for black. I don't really understand why it scores so well, or why black is pretty much equalizing in many lines here, but it just looks really unpleasant to me because you're playing a King's Indian where you traded white's worst piece for your best piece because your pawns are on dark squares, so your light squared bishop is the best, their pawns are on light squared, so their dark squared bishop is the best. So you got the wrong bishop exchange, and yeah, I never liked these positions. So I played bishop g4, which is a blitz move because after the move h3, h5, this is just a common trick that a lot of people fall for, and then you win the game, called the fishing pole trick. But instead he played c3, which is maybe a better move. So here I played queen f6, attacking the pawn. My opponent played d3. And yeah, here I just went for the endgame. It's possible here you can also go for a knight e7, knight bd7. And here I researched, apparently the engine's favorite move is g5. Now, is this a way that a lot of humans would play? It doesn't look very natural to me, but I did know the idea of knight g6. And after h3, you can go for this move h5 again and look forward to this. But in this particular position, I didn't really remember if that was a line, and I kind of lost a game a similar way here. So after takes, I went for knight e7, defending my knight, not looking for double pawns, f4. Here my opponent got rid of the double pawns after castles, bishop e3. Here black is slightly better, and the reason why is because white's pretty much severely down in development, and also their structure is a little bad. So here I could go for d5. Now d5 is a little bit counterintuitive though, because you would think that because my opponent has the two bishops, I wouldn't want to break in the center. But after knight d2 or something like this, I have this nice move d4 trapping the bishop. So my opponent can't continue with simple development. They'd have to go for something like knight a3, and after takes. I simply have this nice dark squared bind, a bishop coming to d6. Position is pleasant for black. Maybe not better, but black is definitely to be preferred. Let's see, what does the engine say about this position? It says -1. Okay, so instead of that, I went for f5, which has a similar idea, except now my bishop's not open. So it becomes a little bit weaker. And I'm not threatening d4. So here my opponent played f3, I played g6, threatening bishop h6 to win the game. So they took. I went for f4, and yeah, okay, in this position, black would be slightly better because, okay, white's pieces are all pretty much cramped. What are any of these pieces doing? And after h3 here, I have to be fast. I have to go for knight g6 and g4 immediately. For example, if my opponent goes for king g2, which we're going to see what happened in the game, I can immediately go for this, and I'm just going to win this pawn by force. Check here, check, and then I would win the pawn, and black would be slightly better because, okay, my opponent doesn't even have the bishop pair. And for example, if my opponent doesn't take, for example, if they go back, something like bishop d6 followed by rook g8, and the position becomes untenable as well. Or here, actually, the immediate bishop e7 instead, and rook g8 would be winning. Okay, so instead I went bishop g7, intending bishop here, and then that same plan with rook g8, but this is simply too slow. After king g6, I did realize that I would not get this off, and yeah, here my opponent's counterplay starts to sow in the center. So I played this knight d8 move, which was ill-advised because I completely missed bishop b3. And so here I was just in tanking mode. I know I'm losing, and basically I just buckled up. So my opponent has all this pressure on my queen side, these guys raging down, a4 coming down the board. A knight having the possibility to get to c5 somehow, has the possibility to threaten all these things. And now here is where my opponent made a huge blunder with that move bishop c4. So here my opponent really has to address the threat of rook g8. It's possible that I should have gone rook g8 on the last move, but I missed it. And the idea is that if I take here, I can take the knight. But after move bishop c4, b5, bishop d3, the move rook hg8, which looked very unnatural, and I was only thinking about this rook. And this would lose, actually, if I move this rook. But this rook would actually, in fact, be winning. Not winning for black, but more so equal. And, for example, in the other line, white can go for this move, knight f7. And if I were to take here, after I move like king h2, I move my bishop back, my opponent would pick up the exchange, and they would be winning. Now, that doesn't happen here because there is no rook to challenge on h8. So what is my opponent to do? They can go h4, and after bishop h6 would win the pawn back, would win a pawn. And here white has more than enough compensation because they have the two bishops and my pieces are pretty peculiarly placed. But yeah, here I would definitely get a lot more counterplay. But at this point I was just blitzing because when you're losing in blitz, or sorry, when you're losing in a like a shorter time control. This was 10-0. You just need to go as fast as possible. Try to play moves quickly to get your opponent to think about how to win. So my opponent played knight e4. I played rook a8, defending the pawn. a4, I took that. Knight c5, I went back to e8. Notice if I go here, I get forked. And if I go here, I get checked and then forked. So no matter what, I was going to get forked here. So I went for king e8, the only move that doesn't get forked. And yeah, here I got forked with knight e6. But my opponent doesn't play it. I went for rook g8, threatening to go here. My opponent, oops, sorry, that was an accident. Didn't mean to give any spoilers. But I went rook g8, my opponent went king f1. I went for a5, getting my pawn out of the way of the attack. My opponent went rook b7. I didn't really know what this move does, but instead I went for king f8 because I was looking to bring the rook here and trade. Bishop c4. I went for rook c8, defending my pawn because they were threatening takes because the knight was pinned. Bishop a2, getting out of the way. Threatening here again. I went for king f8, getting out of the way. Bishop h4. I went knight f5. I thought bishop h4 was not that great of a move because it allowed knight f5, but it might be fine. So if takes on d5, I have knight e3 picking up the piece again, and that's probably their best option because they would have rook c5 and I have to move the knight, in which case I'd be losing because if I go c6, yeah, I'll just show you on the board. Check here, rook c5. If I go c6, my opponent could probably go for the move here and then take this one followed by knight b6. Again, it's just completely really unpleasant. So instead of that, my opponent went bishop g5. I went for knight f3, and yeah, here my opponent is threatening to go for bishop takes f4, takes here, and then take the knight. And I really didn't see how I could parry that, to be honest, because, okay, my knight moved to a more dangerous square. So I went for rook b8, and if my opponent was to take and take here, I could go for this move. Takes. It's possible my opponent probably should have done that to simplify, but my opponent went for rook cb1, which allows me a very, very, very tricky move. And just take a second to see if you can find the move, because without this move, probably it's going to be a pretty quick loss for the black pieces. So I played knight b4, disconnecting the rooks, forcing this trade. And after bishop f5, I have this nice move, knight f5, attacking the d4 pawn. How do you defend the d4 pawn? It's not easy. Probably the only way is bishop e3. And after rook d8, as I played in the game, to threaten the pawn and the bishop. And at this point, I was doing very well again. It was around the point of +1 to +0.5. So instead of that, what did my opponent miss? Here they had the move knight c5, ignoring the threat on d4, because if I were to take on d4, they could go here and, okay, I lose coverage of this square. And after something like rook e8 to cover the square, takes, rook b7, and my knight is pretty much offside here, and these two pawns are going to prove decisive. But instead of that, my opponent could have also gone for bishop c4, and after takes here, the position is also, again, better for white, but this is less clear. So knight c5, what my opponent missed, was definitely a clear chance at keeping the advantage for the game. But yeah, knight b4, important move to find, because it's the only move that keeps things tricky. So after bishop e3, rook d8, my opponent sacked the exchange, which is one of the best moves, and my opponent didn't really think about this much. Here my opponent played knight c5, and at this point I was up a ton of time. I was up around 20 seconds. My opponent had 20 seconds. I had 40 seconds. So all I did was just play fast and play good moves. So rook a8, the only move. You have to get this tempo, or else bishop e6 is pretty much, knight e6 is pretty much killing you. Bishop d5, rook a3. I'm threatening the bishop here. Bishop b3. I went king e7 because I didn't want to get forked. Bishop g5, I went back. Here probably I should have gone king e8 because then I don't allow his bishop in with tempo. But I thought that after bishop g5, I didn't think too long about it, that the d4 pawn was hanging. And it was, but after king d3 is defended, bishop f8, threatening to take, and then take here. King c4. It's possible here I could have gone for the move knight takes d4, and after takes, the position is winning for black. But I missed that with low time. I had 10 seconds here, and so did my opponent. My opponent caught up on time because I needed to think about these moves. Knight e7, king takes e4, rook a1. And here my opponent went a little bit wild. I don't think my opponent was the greatest under time pressure, because I pretty much picked up all his pieces here, one after another, and then the bishop falls. And yeah, here my opponent had 1 second, and so did I, and I managed to flag my opponent. And at this point I had to go, so unfortunately I couldn't play any more games against him. But yeah, excellent match. I learned a lot of stuff from this, like pretty much a lot of things that you don't learn in classical, about like playing fast, keeping time pressure on your opponent, and playing practically. Because okay, in the first game, obviously I think I was winning pretty much the whole time, and then I made a huge blunder, but then I bring the game back by keeping things quick, practical, and playing against my opponent's confidence. And then the second game, obviously I kind of just got rolled over because of a miscalculation, which you can't really make against these strong players. Third game, I got a good opening, and then my opponent just played a great game and got a slight advantage, pushed their advantage, but I just kept practical play in the position, missed some of my chances, but just kept going fast, putting pressure on my opponent, making my opponent annoyed at how I wasn't losing, fighting back, and I was able to win the final game. So that was my match versus Andras Toth. There was not like a professional match or anything. I just managed to randomly queue with him while he was streaming, and yeah, those were some of my best games probably, as I managed to beat him a few times. So hopefully you learned a thing or two about some openings or some middle games, or basically how to deal when you're playing with a player that you think is much stronger than you, and how to, like, calm your nerves and try to win the game. And yeah, don't be content with the draw. That's another thing I learned. In all of these games, you can see that I always play for the win, and if I got a draw, that would have been a good result. But don't play for the draw, because that's asking yourself to lose. So with that all said and done, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.